Hello everybody, I'm Caleb and this is 3D Printing 101. I'm so glad that you're all here. Today we're going to be going over the basics. We're going to talk about the parts of a 3D printer, how it all works, what do all these words mean, and I know it's not as fun as some of the other parts, but once we get through this, it's only going to take a few minutes, then we can start making stuff. So let's start with this. What the heck even is 3D printing? Here's the fancy definition. The process of making a 3D object from a file. What does that mean? Well, there are two types of manufacturing. There's additive manufacturing, where you build up an object by adding layers on top of each other. And then there's subtractive manufacturing. Think wood carving, where you subtract material away, cut it away. Makes sense, right? 3D printing is an example of additive manufacturing. Here's the process. Basically, we have this tiny micro SD card, and on that SD card, we can put tons of different kinds of files. We can put files that we download from the internet, or we can even put files that we make ourselves. But then we take those files and we put them onto this, and then from here it goes to the 3D printer, and that's how we print it out. When you do download a file, or even if you design your own, you're going to be using a file format called an STL. The problem is, your 3D printer doesn't know how to read STL files. It only knows how to read G-code files. So what we need to do is translate STL files into G-code files. And to do that, we use a slicer. A slicer is just a software that translates from an STL to a G-code and allows you to pick which printer you have and adjust certain settings. That's it. So your slicer is the translator and your SD card is just the messenger. All right, now that we understand how 3D printer files work and when to use certain types of files, let's take a closer look at the machines. There are two main types of 3D printers that are available on the market. There are FDM printers, also known as filament printers, which is what I've got here. There are also SLA printers, also known as resin printers. Let's take a closer look at how the printers actually work. So a resin printer is made up of a few things. There's a big container full of liquid resin, and then there's a bed on top with a screen attached to it. The screen will light up in certain areas that activates the resin. The first layer gets attached to the bed. Then just like FDM 3D printing, the layers stack on top of each other as the bed slowly moves up. It does this until you have the final 3D object. Then you can remove it. Resin printers can make really cool objects, and they're way more precise than FDM 3D printers. But, there's a big but. They have some downsides. Number one, they're way more expensive to get into. It's a higher upfront cost for the machine, and then the resin itself is super expensive. This is especially unhelpful because when we're beginners, we make more mistakes, and we don't want our mistakes to be as costly. Resin printers also produce harmful fumes. There are ways to trap these fumes and ventilate them, but that's just going to add to your cost and complexity, and honestly, it is more dangerous. In this course, we're mostly going to be talking about FDM printers. FDM printers also work by stacking layers on top of each other, but instead of using a vat of resin to do that, they use filament. Filament is just the raw plastic that gets melted down and turned into the 3D object. They work almost like a hot glue gun. The nozzle moves, squeezes out plastic, then moves some more and does it again. And again, and again. For most people, FDM 3D printers are the best place to start. Okay, it's important also to understand the basic components of a 3D printer. The parts will vary depending on what printer you have, but the basic ideas are the same. Let's go through them. This is the bed. On top of the bed is the build plate. This is what the print sits on. This is the build plate that I use, and I'll leave a link for it down in the description. Some build plates are glass, some are metal, and some are composite material. But it's important when looking at build plates, especially for beginners, to get one that is removable and flexible. If you get one that's glass, the only way to take off your prints is either to pull super hard or use this, and that can get tricky. A lot of printers come just standard with a removable and flexible build plate, but if yours doesn't, you can just buy one on Amazon and install it. Usually they come in a kit so you can set it up with whatever printer you have. This one just magnetically attaches, so it's easy to take on and off. This is the hot end. The filament is pushed through here and it comes out the nozzle. The nozzle is super tiny, by the way. This one is 0.4 millimeters. Some of them are bigger and some of them are different sizes, but 0.4 millimeters is the most common. The extruder. Sometimes the extruder is located closer to the hot end and sometimes it's further away, like this one. The extruder's job is just to push the filament through. In this case, it uses a Bowden tube so that it can direct the filament. But in some cases, the extruder is right next to the hot end, so it pushes it directly out. The power supply. I'm pretty sure the function of the power supply is self-explanatory, but there's one thing that I need you to know before we move forward. Make sure that you adjust this switch before you print to match your country's power grid. In the United States, we use 115 volts, but you can do a quick Google search to find out which one you need. To change it, just slide it with a screwdriver. The printer's controller board is usually stored somewhere away that's protected from debris and dust and just getting broken. Almost every part on the 3D printer connects somehow to the controller board. It's the brains of the operation. There are 4 stepper motors on this machine. 3 of them control the movement of the machine, and 1 of them controls the extrusion. Sensors. This one uses limit switches. Limit switches just detect when the motor has moved too far and it says, hey, this is the end, don't spin anymore. This just helps keep the printer calibrated. The screen or user interface is how we control the printer. This one uses a knob, and then on the knob you can press on it, and this is just how we interact with the printer. This is how we raise the temperature, control the positioning, and start the print itself. We also have the spool holder, the filament, and the SD card slot. Okay, I know that was a lot of information. I'm sorry for giving it to you all at once, but don't worry if you don't remember something. I have a cheat sheet down below you can download for free, and even if you don't remember everything, that is totally fine. You don't need to know every point on the list. It's just helpful knowledge and you'll pick it up later on. Safety. All right, safety is arguably the most important topic that we're going to cover today. So if you're going to pay attention to any one part of the presentation, pay attention right now. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be hard, but there are 3 basic rules. If you follow them, you should be safe. Number 1, things get hot. Think about it. You got to melt plastic. Plastic needs to get pretty hot to melt. So I'm not talking like, a nice warm 95 degrees Fahrenheit. These things get hundreds of degrees Celsius. The nozzle generally heats up to 220, 230 sometimes degrees Celsius. The bed, on the other hand, heats up to 80-ish to 90-ish degrees Celsius, sometimes 60 or 70. If you touch the top of the bed, you're probably fine. But if you touch the bottom, you are not fine. The bed has to get way hotter than the top so that it's evenly heated. The nozzle, do not touch the nozzle. I've touched the nozzle before because I was stupid and I was like 12 and it hurt. So don't do it. It's not worth it. I wish I had this course when I started, again, just so someone would tell me don't do that. Number 2, sharp things. When you get your 3D printer, you're going to get some cool blank. You're going to see this guy, and you're going to be like, oh, that's so cool. I can't wait to use it. This is not the best way to get stuff off of your 3D printer. As I talked about earlier, flexible build plates help you take stuff off more easily. These things are sharper than they look. You can touch it, and you're probably going to be fine. But when you're trying to scrape something off, and sometimes it's going to happen, you're going to need to use this, make sure you're scraping away. If you're with somebody that you like, don't scrape towards them. The other thing that you're going to get is snips, these flush cutters. And they're super useful. I don't want to sound like these things are super dangerous and scary and you should never use them, because that is not true. Don't put your fingers in here. That's all I got to say. It's sharp. Don't cut yourself. They will cut you. Number 3, use common sense. If you find yourself thinking, God, I wonder what would happen if I stuck this banana in the fan, don't do it. That's stupid. Don't be an idiot. Okay, everybody, I hope that you had as much fun as I did. If you're ready for more, your brain muscles are working, click the button. I'll see you in the next lesson.